Kim Peets and welcome to My Story, His Story. What do we know about Seventh-day Adventist church leaders and how has God influenced them? In this series, we take a closer look at the lives of these Christian leaders and invite them to share their story with us. Here with me is Dr. Daryl Murdoch, Senior Education Administrator. Welcome, Daryl.
Thanks, Kim. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it's lovely to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about your childhood. You're an administrator, you're an educator, and your father was a principal.
My father was a state school principal for 40 years in South Australia. So I grew up moving from country town to country town in Adelaide and in the surrounding Adelaide Hill area, and thoroughly enjoyed living in schoolhouses all over the state. It was a wonderful life. After school I could wander around the yard, and I could also enjoy going under the milk stand, and when all the little quart bottles of milk were left behind I could go in and take the lids off and lick off the cream. It was very special.
Those were the days. We need to have that again, I think.
Indeed.
and you had some special stories that are really significant in your life that I'd love to hear about.
Look, I had godly parents and I must thank them tremendously for the example they showed me in my life. They were wonderful, and they were very much involved in church life. In fact, Dad would take sermons at a range of churches beyond the Seventh-day Adventist Church in communities. He was very much involved on conference executive committees, union executive, division executive, so they were wonderful role models. But as a child, yeah, I have some special memories, and one of the things that I really loved as a child, and I still do, is fishing. Might sound a bit strange, but I enjoy fishing. And I used to love going up the River Murray to the Waikerie district, and we had an old gentleman there who ran a farm, a wheat sheep farm in the Mallee of South Australia, and his name was Uncle Ben. And we used to go and stay at Uncle Ben's at Waikerie, and I loved doing it. One of the interesting stories going up there, and the roads were straight as a gun barrel going up into country South Australia, was I was driving along in a utility, my brother-in-law on one side, my brother on the other, my older brother. I was just a little 8-year-old sitting in the middle, and we were just driving along this road, and I glanced out the right-hand window and I saw the boat we were towing passing us. So I tapped my brother on the shoulder and I said, "Warren, is that our boat going past?" And he couldn't believe it. He slammed on the brakes and we came to a halt and the boat disappeared up the road.
Oh no.
Needless to say, that day we spent a lot of time bailing in amongst fishing when we were out on the water. But one of the experiences that really stand out in my mind was perhaps something that illustrates a point I want to make about small things making a difference in our lives. I would have been, as I said, about 8 or 9 at the time, and the men used to go fishing along the cliffs there on the Murray River in South Australia. Beautiful big sandstone cliffs, quite dangerous, quite slippery, and as a young tacker I had to stay back with the ladies where they were having picnic lunch and fish there on the banks where everybody else was fishing.
That's not fun.
And it wasn't fun. And when the men came back at lunchtime they had a sack full of fish and I had nothing. I wasn't very happy about this fishing caper and being left behind. But after lunch that day, something amazing happened. I went back to my line and pulled it in, and here was this beautiful big cod on the end. And I was absolutely ecstatic. In fact, you could say I've been wrapped with fishing ever since. The little rider was that many years later my brother actually told me he put it on the line over lunch, and I didn't know.
But then you still have a love for fishing
Absolutely.
today.
Yeah, I still enjoy getting out in the great outdoors, and fishing's a small component. It's just relaxing and getting away, beautiful sunsets, beautiful sunrises, and just times of quietness and solitude are just very, very special.
Oh, that's right. And after a hard day, that's perfect, isn't it?
Indeed. Indeed.
It seems like the small things in your life have made a significant change. Share with me another story that might have seemed insignificant to the other person, but was a big change for you in your life.
Yes, Kim, I'm a great believer that we can all make a huge difference in people's lives, and as an educator, particularly in young people's lives. And one educator that really stands out in my mind is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Alan Lindsay. And many people in Australia who have been to Avondale College will know him as a fine Christian gentleman. And I was just a young lad at Avondale College in my first year doing primary education. I was standing in a line waiting to deposit some money. No, probably more likely withdrawing some money. And Dr. Lindsay walked past. I'd never met him before, and he stopped and he said, Daryl Murdoch, is that right? And I said, yes. He said, how are you? How are you settling in? Are you enjoying Avondale? And we had a nice little conversation, and I later learnt that he went to what we called the shopping list, the Arana, which was all the student photographs, and he would go through and memorise all the new students. And that made an impression. But what perhaps made more of an impression on me was later in my third year of teaching, was getting to the serious end of the process of preparing to be an educator, and I was looking forward to being a teacher. But I had a lecturer there who really didn't seem to like my teaching style, and was always being quite critical of my lessons when I was giving prac lessons, and I would come away feeling quite devastated and quite discouraged, to the point where at times I thought, perhaps teaching isn't for me. Maybe this is just something I should not even consider. But it was during that time of despondency that Dr. Alan Lindsay stepped in again. He was a senior lecturer in the education department, and he came to crit one of my lessons one day, and he had just such a wonderful way about him. He was able to somehow give you constructive criticism without you feeling as if you'd been a failure. And he affirmed, he said, I believe in you, I think you're going to make a wonderful teacher, a wonderful educator, don't give up, I see a lot of good in you, continue.
Stay tuned, we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to My Story, His Story. I'm talking with Daryl Murdoch, Senior Administrator Educator. Thank you, Daryl. We've had a lovely time chatting, and we've also been talking about your childhood and some very significant things that have happened in your life. Now, you've worked in all sorts of places, and you've worked as a teacher, you've worked as a principal, you've worked as an administrator. Tell us some of the highlights of being a teacher.
Highlights, challenges.
You can share some of those too if you wish.
One of the things that's always struck me, Kim, is the way God prepares us for every challenge. He is amazing in that regard. And probably the first challenge that I had was straight out of Avondale College into a sole charge principalship. And to be in a situation where at 21 years of age, you're in charge of 25, 26 children, and you're preparing copious lessons in spelling and reading and maths every day, and trying to make sure that you're meeting their needs was a real challenge. And an illustration to me of the way God was good was there were times when I would think to myself, I'm well prepared for the day. I'd stayed up late the night before, I've got my maths lessons ready, I've got my English lessons ready, got double division Bible, double division social studies, and I would go into the day feeling extremely confident that things were going to go well. Often, you know, Kim, those days turned out to be a real disaster because there was one missing ingredient. There were other days when I knew I wasn't ready. I knew that I hadn't had enough sleep, or I had a board meeting the night before, or I was just feeling a bit tired, and I would go into my office all by myself, and I would kneel down on my knees and I would say, Lord, I'm not ready for today. I really am not sure how we're going to get through. I need your help. I need your guidance. And it was at those times, believe it or not, and I kid you not, that those days were brilliant. The kids were responsive, we got onto a topic that they enjoyed, and the day just seemed to fly and be tremendous. And you'd come away from those days saying, thanks God, I really appreciated your help today. And there's many stories that I could tell in how he has been there to meet the challenge when the challenge needed to be met.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. And you've got a particular letter that has stayed with you for years now that you'd like to share with us?
Look, Kim, as a teacher, one of the things that's very special is to touch children's lives. And I think all of us can look back on teachers that had a significant influence on our life. We don't remember much of the things we were taught, but quite often what we do remember is the way teachers treated us.
That's so true.
And I guess one of the things that's been special to me is at the end of a school year, having a parent come up and give me this little note. And if you'd like, I'll share this little note with you.
I'd love you to read it, please do.
Here's the little note. This is the original note that I received quite a number of years ago when I was still a principal and a primary teacher. And it says to Daryl, "A big thank you for looking after Michael, especially this last year. I know that Michael really looks up to you and wishes he could live with the Murdochs. Thank you for your understanding and support and love with Michael and his problems, and Michael himself. Also your fatherly love to Michael when away on camps. I used to run Pathfinder camps. Michael told me of the time you carried him to bed when he fell asleep. Michael was surprised you cared for him so much and carried him to his sleeping bag. Hope you and your family have a most enjoyable holiday. Thanks and Christian regards." Those sort of things, Kim, are the things that are very special as an educator, and it's a real privilege to be able to make a difference in the lives of children.
What other life experiences have you had that you could share with us?
Well, Kim, probably another one from Albury days was involving the Hume Weir, which was about 15 minutes drive out of Albury. One day a friend and I, church friend, decided it was a hot day, we were going to go and do some water skiing and some fishing. He had a friend with a boat, so we were borrowing a friend's boat. And we went out and we had some wonderful time water skiing until we basically water skied out, and we decided that we'd motor over to the side of the weir where there were lots of dead trees, which were a good place to do a bit of fishing. I was kneeling in the back of the boat, rigging up a line, and he was driving along, and I sort of glanced out and I noticed the water was no longer a nice deep green. It had become quite turbid and muddy. And I also noticed an occasional tree stump, and I was about to yell out to him and say, "I think you might need to slow down, this water looks a little bit shallow." And there was an almighty thump, and instead of ringing up a line kneeling in the back of the boat, I was thrown completely out of the boat, and the next thing I heard was the buzz of the motor passing my head, and I was floundering away in the water, and all of a sudden I found it was only up to my chest and I could stand up. And there was my friend about 20 metres away, like a captain of a sinking boat, watching this ski boat with a 120 horsepower motor slowly sink backwards into the water. And they're just a little experience of, I think, God's protection and leading. It wasn't a pretty picture to take back to his friend with a big gash right in the side of his boat from where it hit a big tree stump. It wasn't a pretty day.
No, I can imagine we probably shouldn't ask what happened there. Oh dear. So, back to teaching, have you sort of ever had second thoughts about teaching or perhaps change of career?
Look, I think teaching's in your blood. I would say to anybody, if they want to be a teacher, you've got to love kids.
Yeah.
And I've always been somebody who loved kids. I've always been a bit of a big kid. And I think you've got to be that to stay in tune with young people. But look, there were times when I've thought about changing career direction, still within education. When I was perhaps 20 years into my teaching, early 40s, you know, that sort of time frame in life, I was contemplating where I wanted to go, and I was doing my master's degree at the time at the University of Adelaide, or should I say the University of South Australia. And I was doing a stint for my lecturer, filling in as he went on a sabbatical, and I was filling in doing his lecturing load, as well as being the principal of one of our schools in Adelaide. And I at the time was thinking, do I want to continue in Adventist education, or perhaps do I want to go into lecturing? And I remember distinctly getting down on my knees and saying, God, what do you want me to do? You know, Adelaide is my home, I'm an Adelaide boy. I need a challenge. Is there a challenge you've got for me? Please give me a sign. Just a few weeks later, it was staffing season, and I got a phone call to say, Daryl, we'd like you to go as National Director of Adventist Education in New Zealand. Would you go? And I said, Lord, you know how to throw a challenge in one's direction.
Thank you so much again for some more stories. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to My Story, His Story. I've been talking with Dr. Daryl Murdoch, Senior Education Administrator. I've really been enjoying our chats this series, and I just would like to ask you just a couple more questions. I think it would be great to hear some of the highlights and lowlights of your career, and if there's just a couple of ones that you could share with us.
Sure, Kim. I'd rather dwell on the highlights than the lowlights. You know, the lowlights, of course, as an educator, I think are probably having to deal with young people who just sometimes don't seem to be able to make the adjustments to work within the school culture, and you face some fairly major discipline issues, and to sometimes have to work with your school council and say, perhaps there's no place for this young person in our school. Is perhaps the lowest light, because you really feel as if you're playing God with their lives sometimes. But you're trying to balance out that with the good of the rest of the students in the school. And it is a very challenging part of your role as an educator.
Juggle, isn't it? Really?
It is. It's a tension, because every soul is a soul for the kingdom, but there are times when the good of the many must outweigh the individual. I think it's probably, that to me has been one of the most challenging aspects of my role. But the highlights, well look, plenty of highlights, but probably the most incredible highlight is when young people come back and say, you were my favourite teacher, you made a difference in my life. Because we've talked about people who made a difference in my life, and if I can do that in turn, I'm wrapped. And I think we all think back to teachers that inspired us or influenced us in some way. We don't remember much of what we were taught. I don't anyhow.
Yeah, that's true.
But you do remember the way in which teachers treated you, and that has stuck with me. And perhaps one of the real highlights for me was a letter I received on one occasion from a parent at the end of a school year. Do you mind if I share it with you?
Oh, absolutely. Go for it. It would be great.
I've kept this original note.
Have you?
And it was special to me because I guess it signified what being a teacher for me is all about, being an educator. To Daryl, a big thank you for looking after Michael, especially this last year. I know that Michael really looks up to you and wishes he could go and live with the Murdochs. Thank you for your understanding and support and love with Michael and his problems, and with Michael himself. Also, your fatherly love to Michael went away on camps. I used to be involved in Pathfinders. Michael told me of the time you carried him to bed when he fell asleep. Michael was surprised you carried him to his sleeping bag. Hope you and your family have a most enjoyable holiday. Thanks, in Christian love. Kim, they're gold, those type of little memories that come to you as a teacher.
Oh, that's actually really beautiful. Is that why you've decided to be a fisher of men, and that's perhaps why Peter is your favourite Bible character?
In many ways. I like Peter because there was an ability for God to use the roughest of fishermen and make something special from them. He said, this rock is a rock I'm going to build my church upon. And he was a rough and tumble sort of a guy.
Fishing's dirty work, isn't it?
It is. It certainly can be. And Peter was somebody who had lots of drive and energy, and you know, the lowest scenes in the life of Christ are the ones that really appeal to me in terms of the way in which Jesus treated Peter. You know, if you start in the upper room, you've got Peter there and all the other disciples saying, Lord, you're not going to touch us and wash our feet. Where's the servant to come and to wash our feet? And Jesus took the towel, took the bowl, put the towel over his arm and started to go to the disciples. And when he came to Peter, Peter in his typical bombastic fashion said, "Not me, Lord. You're not going to touch me. This is not something that you're going to do." And Jesus said, "Peter, unless I wash your feet, you have no part of my kingdom." And then typical Peter, "Well, if that's the case, wash all of me. Don't stop at my feet. Wash the whole lot."
Yeah.
And of course, the story unfolds on that fateful evening when Jesus was led to Calvary. And Peter, not long after, was up there in the Garden of Gethsemane, cutting off the high priest's ear, Malchus, once again, out there, full of energy, full of life, full of drive. And then not long after, we find Peter perhaps at his lowest point. Jesus predicted, "Tonight, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. Not me. I would go anywhere with you. I would go to the grave. Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. And of course, we go past the Garden of Gethsemane, and here's Peter sitting around while Jesus is being tried and severely beaten and bashed. And we have people coming to Peter, and Peter curses and swears and says, "I don't know that man." And a second time, he curses and swears, "I don't know that man. I certainly have never heard of him. What are you talking about?" And the third time, he denies and he curses and he swears. And at that point of time, the cock crowed, Jesus came out of the judgment hall, and he looked across and their eyes met. I like the way the clear word puts it. It says, their eyes met. And the look that was given must have been a look of compassion. Now, as a husband, I know when I get the look. It's not something that you want to have very often. But this look was not the look, it was a special look. Their eyes met, and Peter knew he was forgiven right there and then. And I believe it was then that Peter went out and he poured out his heart, he cried, and I think it was then that Peter was truly converted and realised just how much he loved his Lord and how much he wanted to serve him. And of course the story rolls on, and we find Peter not long after back fishing. He's on the beach. He's fishing again with his friends. And we have this incredible story of his restoration. Along comes Jesus on the beach. They have finally recognised who it is. Peter's out of the boat, swims to shore, and they have a meal together. And it's not long after that Jesus and Peter are just quietly sitting by themselves. And Jesus says, "Peter, do you love me?" Peter says, "Yes, the restoration is underway. Yes, you know that I love you." A little bit later, the conversation goes on. And again, Jesus asks the question, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, I do, Lord." "Well, feed my sheep." And then a third time, and I like the way the clear word puts it in the book of John, chapter 21 and verse 17. Jesus asked a third time, "Peter, are you sure you're my friend?" This last question stung Peter's heart. With tears in his eyes, he answered, "Lord, you know everything, and you know how unsure I am of my own heart. You are the only one who knows whether I am really your friend or not." Jesus said, "I know that deep down you are my friend, so I want you to take care of my lambs and my sheep." And that is one of the joys and privileges of being a Christian educator.
Thank you so much for sharing your inspiring words to us, and I really appreciate it, and I know our viewers will also really love to hear what you had to say. Do you have any final words to say to anyone who might be listening now about teaching and becoming a teacher?
Kim, my journey has been a wonderful journey. I've now been in Adventist education over 30 years. Whenever I've needed a challenge, God has provided, and I can guarantee that any person who is called to the teaching ministry or the pastoral ministry for that matter will find a life of wonderful service. And I would encourage any young person to take up the cause of Christian education, because it's wonderfully fulfilling and you can make a wonderful difference in the lives of young people, difference for eternity.
Thank you so much, Daryl, and thank you for your time today. You've been watching My Story, His Story. I'm Kim Peets, and we hope you join us next time.